Great. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for introducing yourselves in the chat. My name is Audrey Wippenhorst. My pronouns are she and her, and I have the privilege of working with Eco Canada on a series of webinars. This is the third in our spring series. So welcome, everybody. I'm joining you from the land of the Haudenosaunee and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. And I would invite you, if you haven't already been on his website, to go to native-land.ca, and there you can figure out what Indigenous lands you are working on this afternoon. So I'm just going to spend a minute describing how the session will unfold. So just bear with me as I'm admitting everybody and sharing my screen. And while I do that, I would just invite you, for those of you who are joining us, please feel free to share your name and your organization in the chat so that we know who is with us this afternoon or this morning, depending on what time zone you're in. In just a minute, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Maureen, who's going to share some opening remarks and a little bit more information about our host organization, Eco Canada, as well as an exciting mentoring program that Maureen is leading on behalf of Eco Canada. Then we'll move into our panel discussion. We're really privileged to have three high-quality panelists with us this afternoon, and we'll have a great discussion on building an inclusive blue economy. Towards the end of the session, we'll have a little bit of time for audience questions. Feel free, though, to please, add any comments or commentary in the chat, and we'll keep our eyes on that and try to make sure that this is as interactive as possible. With that, just a couple of housekeeping remarks. It would be greatly appreciated if you could just kind of stay on mute until the panel section is over. And just hang on one second. We have a few more people coming in, which is wonderful. So we would love for you to stay on mute. And as I said, we'll keep our eyes on the chat and just make sure that we catch all of those comments this afternoon. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Maureen, and I've had the privilege of working with Maureen on a couple of projects, in particular this webinar series. So Maureen, over to you, and I'm just going to advance the slides.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Audrey, for that introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Maureen. I'm working with Eco Canada as a Blue Economy Project Manager, and I'm joining today from Halifax in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territories of the Mi'kmaq people. And so this webinar has been organized as part of the Blue Mentorship and Leadership Pathway project that is mostly funded by the Ocean Supercluster, and that we're partnering with the Center for Ocean Ventures and Entrepreneurship in Halifax, the Joint Economic Development Initiative in New Brunswick, and the College of the North Atlantic in Newfoundland. So just a few introductive remark about what do we do at Eco Canada. So we are steward of the Canadian environmental workforce in all industries. And as a nonprofit, we work in different sectors of activities, going from job creation, wage funding, training, post-secondary accreditation in different university and different organizations, but also labor market research, and we provide HR solutions for businesses, etc. If you want more information, we have a very extensive website, so you can find all the information at eco.ca, or you can contact me directly if you're interested in learning more about that. And when it comes to the project that I'm working on, that actually is what funded and what created this series of webinars in Blue Economy is the Blue Mentorship and Leadership Pathway project that I mentioned before, which has two main goals. So the first one is to connect ocean founders to ocean experts to help them lead and grow effectively the organization and the sector. So to do so, we have this amazing mentorship program that started early in April, and that's been running online since then. So we have mentors and mentees from different provinces all across Canada. So everything is online, and that will be running at least until the end of July. And what we called ocean funders are people who are new to the ocean sector, people who created a startup, or people who just started in the sector, graduate students in a related field of study, but also people who have been working in the sector for a while and want to evolve towards something more related to blue economy, for example. And we want to connect these professionals to ocean experts who are professionals who have been working in the ocean sector for a while and wants to are willing actually to like share some advice, competencies, skills, etc., with those ocean founders. And the second goal, which is one of the main considerations of this project, is to be able to create an accessible and inclusive program for women, visible minority groups, and Indigenous peoples interested in working in the sector. So the blue economy related activities, but like the ocean sector in general. As I said, it's been running since the beginning of April until the end of July, and everything is online. And that's about it for me. If you have any question, if you're interested in that program, you want more information, feel free to reach out to me. I will put my email address in the chat. You can send me something anytime. I'm happy to answer the question about this project or Eco Canada in general, and very happy to take part in this webinar today, because I'm sure it'll be really interesting. So thank you, Audrey.
Thanks so much, Maureen, and appreciate you taking the time to share the program. And certainly we would love to have more participants. So you're welcome to reach out to Maureen as well. So with that, I'm just going to stop sharing. And just bear with me. We want to make sure that I have everything set up here. Okay, looks good. So I'd like to take this time to introduce our panelists. And for those of you who just joined us in the last couple of minutes, welcome. We're going to run through a panel discussion with our 3 esteemed panelists this afternoon, and then we'll take a little bit of time towards the end to make sure that we have an opportunity for audience questions and answers. Having said that, please feel free to add any comments in the chat, and any, we've also been fortunate to have participants add resources, links to other maybe projects and programs they're working on. So feel free to share that along the way as the conversation comes up. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. And maybe just one quick reminder before I get started, it would be greatly appreciated for those of you who have phoned in, and we do have a few people on the phone, I think, to just make sure that you're muted. That would be great. And once we get to the questions and answers, you can feel free to come off mute and share your questions. Okay, thanks everybody. So I'm going to share a little bit of introductory remarks and the biographies of our panelists who are with us this afternoon. And we're really excited to talk about ensuring growth and prosperity for all in the blue economy. So I'm going to start and introduce Ashley. Ashley Noseworthy is the CEO of Edgewise Environmental. She's a certified woman-owned marine environmental consultancy, and her organization is based in St. John's, Newfoundland. She is accomplished in project management and is an accomplished entrepreneur. She has over 15 years of experience in environmental management and regulatory compliance across a variety of marine sectors, including oil and gas, renewable energy, environmental emergency response, as well as academic expeditions. She's worked globally in the offshore energy sector in management, compliance and training roles, and was one of the first females in a management role permitted offshore within the Arabian Gulf. She holds a BSc in biology from Memorial University and a master's degree in international marine environmental consulting from Newcastle University, as well as a master's diploma in project management from York University. So really pleased to have Ashley with us this afternoon. I'd also like to introduce Alexa Goldman, the training manager for Marine Environmental Observation Prediction and Response Network, also known as MEOPAR, I believe, and the founder of AG Consulting. Alexa is a marine manager committed to helping the planet and its people by shifting awareness into action, using curiosity, compassion, and strong project management to lead the way. Great, I love that line, it's really good. To provide the next generation of marine researchers with the tools and knowledge they need to succeed in their careers, they joined MEOPAR's team in May 2021 as a training program manager and have been working as an independent consultant since 2019. Alexa is a scientist, intersectional environmental activist, yogi, and champion of managing abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear, also called ghost gear. Their work aligns with several ocean decade outcomes, making waves of change for future generations. So welcome, Alexa, and glad to have you with us as well. I'd also like to introduce Ken Paul, the lead fisheries negotiator and research coordinator. for the nation of New Brunswick and an independent board member of the Ocean Supercluster. So pleased to have Ken with us too. Ken is a member of the Walasnoghi First Nation, is a member of whose traditional territory is located on the northern Atlantic coast, spanning the Canada-US border between Maine, New Brunswick, and Quebec, including the Bay of Fundy and approaches to the Gulf of Maine. Over the past 11 years, Ken has held positions as a fisheries director within the Assembly of First Nations and previously with the Atlantic Policy Congress of First Nations Chiefs. Ken has advocated for First Nations regionally, nationally, and internationally on all aspects relating to fisheries, aquaculture, ocean protection, and aquatic resources as they relate to inherent Aboriginal and treaty protected rights, legislation, and policy. Previous to this, he worked for 10 years in field-based ocean mapping with the Canadian Hydrographic Service and another 10 years with Parks Canada as a senior policy advisor. Ken has an MBA from St. Mary's University and a BSc from Dalhousie University, and extensive training in leadership, policy development, mediation, labor relations, First Nations governance, and traditional teaching. So really glad to have the three of you with us this afternoon. And we just have a few more people joining us, which is great. We're going to move into the panel discussion. And what I'm going to do is we have a series of questions that the team has put together. We're going to ask each of the panelists to take the lead on one of the questions and then the others to share their thoughts and jump in as well. And for those of you who are joining us, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We're just getting into the panel discussion component of the webinar. So I'm going to ask Alexa the first question, which maybe is a big opening question. How do we define diversity and inclusion in the blue economy?
It's a really tough question to answer because I don't think there's one clear definition. And I think that this definition will continue to improve over time as we've seen progress with EDIA initiatives. Just a reminder, if you're not on mute.
I'm going to try to do that on my end here.
Thank you.
There we go. Back over to you, Alexa. Sorry about that.
So for me, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, or whatever other acronym you want to use, they all go hand in hand. And I explained this to Audrey when we had first chatted, that to me, EDIA, JEDI, whatever acronym you want to use, is a lens that is applied to everything that we do and is woven throughout our work and our lives, and it will affect people differently in different ways. But in particular, in the blue economy, to me, diversity and inclusion is really making sure that the folks who are at the table are representative of the end users who will be affected, making sure that, there is intergenerational equity in high-level decision-making, ensuring that youth from different backgrounds, whether that be from previously marginalized communities or who are people living with disabilities, they also have a say and chance to participate in different opportunities and initiatives. So when it comes down to, defining diversity in the blue economy, I am not quite sure that I could give a clear-cut definition because it is such a broad topic. And I'll pitch it back to the other panelists to see if there's anything to add to that definition. But I would say EDIA is a lens that can be woven through all that we do.
Thanks, Alexa. And I'll turn it over to Ashley just for any other comments on how do we define diversity and inclusion in the blue economy?
I would agree with everything that Alexa said. I think it's very hard to give a specific definition to, but when I was reflecting on this question, I really thought that, if we're thinking about diversity and inclusion specifically in the blue economy, maybe that's best defined by those in the ecosystem that are now considering jobs or careers in the blue economy that traditionally maybe they wouldn't have. So whether that is from a career standpoint, software developers, maybe that's from a gender lens, maybe that's from, however you want to identify yourself. If we have more people that are considering those positions, then perhaps that's how we can best define diversity and inclusion in that space.
Great. So great. So hearing from Alex and Maureen, so certainly the definition needs to be quite broad and leaning on those that are entering the blue economy to define it as well. I'm just going to ask Ken for any other comments around how do we define diversity and inclusion in the blue economy?
Well, even I think a lot of people would think when we're talking, especially in a forum like this, we're talking about people. And yes, that's very, very important, this kind of thing. I would also like people to sort of expand their thoughts and think about different kinds of job opportunities that are diverse, that may not necessarily on the surface be considered part of the ocean economy, but very much are incorporated within that. And also to think of other factors rather than just employment and technology, but also think about the environmental impacts and invest in that as well, knowing that everything that we do on this planet is going to affect the health of fish, the health of the biosphere, the health of the air quality that we have here, the health of our forests, and also consider those kind of things too. So I'm hoping that when we make decisions going forward, and if Canada does actually make investments in the blue economy, that all of those other activities that are going to impact coastal communities and things like that, they're also going to be included, and that there are a variety of job positions that can be actually eligible for support funding and things like that.
Great. So it's casting a wide net in terms of defining also the blue economy and the kinds of roles and jobs that fall under that, for sure. Thanks very much, Ken. We're going to go to the next question. I'm going to turn it over to Ashley to take the lead on this one. So considering, I think we've all advocated for a broad definition of inclusion. What might be some barriers to inclusion? That's part one of the question. Then part two, how can we help to overcome some of those barriers, or what are some ideas to dismantling those barriers?
So when it comes to barriers, I kind of have a list that I've drawn out. It's by no means exhaustive. And I think when we're drawing out lists and when we think about barriers, it very much comes from a place of your own personal experience. And so I think it's important to recognize privilege in some places as well. But I definitely think some of those barriers are things like lack of education and awareness. That could be unequal accessibility to education, or just general lack of awareness of DEIA in general, that, it might be a new topic for companies, businesses, people entering into this particular space. Actual physical barriers to the A in DEIA seems to be new for some people. And that really hit home at a conference that I attended recently, where they talked about that accessibility piece and those actual physical barriers that may be in place that we really need to remove, to make sure that it is truly inclusive. Unconscious bias, I think we're all familiar with this, is general stereotyping, a tick box approach. So when you're approaching this type of subject, it can't simply just be, yeah, okay, we've done something, we check the box and then just kind of sit it on a shelf. It is very much not that. So if you're truly committed to including and diversifying and having equity in a business or a space, that is an iterative process. So I think we need to do away with thinking that this is a mountain to climb and that there's a peak to summit, and that once we get to the top, we're done, because it is not that. If anything, I picture it as a very long road you continuously drive. Picture the Trans-Canada Highway with no end. And I very much think that is the road that we're on. Prioritization dilution. So this is really where, from a business lens, that a business might come in and say, okay, well, we have to manage this and this and this and this and this, and then we'll get to DEIA. So it kind of falls to the bottom of the list. And then perhaps one that could be a little bit of a touchy subject, but I thought about this a lot, could be things like tradition and culture. So again, coming from a point of view of, are there barriers that may exist in the cultures that we exist in that are preventing people from coming in, or are there cultures that, it's a touchy subject, but I think it's an important one to recognize that there just could be some barriers there. So in regards to how all of those things can be overcome, that's a long list, and I'm not going to try and summarize all of that. But I think we need to be very clear on the messaging that we have. The why is so important, and it promotes buy-in. We need to make sure that conversation is promoted, that debate is encouraged, because this is how people learn. And if these are simply sideline conversations that you're having and you feel like it's kind of like in dark corners where you, like you say, DEIA, and people get uncomfortable, I think it's important for people to be uncomfortable, and that's how we best learn in those types of situations. So it can't be a taboo topic. It needs to be ingrained in the day-to-day of anything that we do, and leads to kind of Ken's point in terms of those holistic choices that we're making, not just from a lens of business, but from a lens of making sure that we do better for the planet. Holding people accountable, putting people in leadership roles that are meaningful. You have to put them in leadership roles, but it has to be human and it has to be relatable. It needs to be measurable. We can't actually then go back and say we've done well if we don't measure. And the point that I want to make on this is that I don't just mean by counting how many women you have in a business, or how many, men, or, those types of things. What I mean is, put it in terms of profits, put it in terms of different types of metrics. So it's not just that we're trying to be categorized by how we look or how we identify.
Okay, great, Ashley. Thanks. Very, very thorough answer, reminding us, I think, to think about the place of privilege that we all come from, but then also reminding us about, I think, some important points around the issue of accessibility, which is not always front and center in the conversation. And certainly thinking about this beyond a sort of tick boxing exercise and building it into a more kind of meaningful practice in terms of the way we do business in the blue economy. I'll turn it over to Ken. So any other comments in terms of barriers to inclusion and how we might be able to overcome those barriers?
Yeah, that was there's a lot there, Ashley, to talk about for sure. One of the things that I'm always kind of very conscious of is academic bias or credential bias. We are taught and conditioned to think that we have to go to university after high school, get our undergrad, potentially get a master's degree. And the more letters you have behind your name, the more, I guess, credible you are. But when we think that way and we act that way, we actually miss out on people who are practitioners. So the whole concept of Indigenous knowledge, for example, is this idea that there are Indigenous peoples all over this planet that have intimate knowledge about their local ecosystems or places where they do traditional practices, but because they don't have academic credentials, that their knowledge systems and their information and their methodologies are not considered valuable. There is a global trend towards changing that right now. The international accords on climate change and on biodiversity are recognizing Indigenous peoples and local communities, specifically because of these local practices. And, so that's something that Canada is going to have to grapple with. But how that sort of relates to how we are, this discussion topic on blue economy today, I'm a fan of learning about different approaches and trying to find solutions in non-traditional places. And then, yes, we can, work really hard and get our science degrees, our engineering degrees, our business degrees, and to, be ready for the blue economy. But innovation is not going to come from that. The innovation is going to come from talking to others who are not necessarily related to this whole field, and hopefully being able to overcome barriers that come in our way, because we're going to run into problems. We're going to need a diversity of minds to not only help problem solve, but to do it in such a way that we are doing it sustainably to help build abundance in our ocean sector, not just sustainability. Anyway, that's sort of where my mind goes when we talk about barriers to diversity.
Great, thanks, Ken. And I like that term, credential bias, which I think we probably, most of us do have, right? And looking for other types of knowledge and making sure that that's not that we're not excluding ideas because of a credential bias, or excluding solutions because of a credential bias. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Alexa, any comments around barriers to inclusion, and then ways to dismantle the barriers?
I feel like I will be echoing a lot of what my previous guests have said, so I'll save my comments for another question.
Okay, well, thanks very much. We're going to go to the next question, which is around community engagement, and I'm going to lean on Ken to take the lead on this one. So how can we, as practitioners in the blue economy, how can we ensure proper community engagement, and what might that involve, or what might that look like?
Well, you can't do community engagement from a laptop or your cell phone. Like you actually, what really matters to communities is presence. You actually have to go into the communities, and what I've experienced over many years of working in this field, that when you go into a community and you go in with an agenda, you're probably not going to be successful. You really have to, a lot of people will talk about, yeah, I have to build relationships, but that actually means something. A lot of people don't understand that when we're in the public service or the business sector coming into communities. You got to be able to be prepared to spend time, because community members, not only do they want you in their community, but they're going to assess whether you are genuine. They're going to get a feeling from you. They're going to watch your body language. They're going to listen closely to the words you're saying. And they're going to expect that you are going to come back to the community rather than jumping into a community, trying to pull something out and go away. Whereas the community will wonder, well, what's the benefits to us? There's a lot of innovation and thinking within communities themselves, because if you are living in an area, you're going to know what's going on in your backyard, rather than somebody that's studying from a lab in Montreal, or somebody who's in downtown Vancouver working from an office building. It's the relationship. Once you build that relationship, though, then you should be able to get full community support, which is really what you want. And also, you should be prepared to adapt, like your goal of going into the community. Like, for example, if you're coming into a community to find out the best place to build a wharf, the community may say and help you find areas to build wharves, but they may also have other asks of uses of that wharf as well. So that ability to share and to open up so that you can actually have mutual benefits is really, really important. I think that everything that we do should build in community aspects. In the business world, there's this concept of corporate social responsibilities. That's part of the triple bottom line now, where the bottom line used to be just financial, but the triple bottom line includes social and environmental. So that's what you need to develop sustainable businesses, and it's really good practices. So if you want sustainability, and I'm hoping the blue economy is going to, the strategy coming from Canada is going to emphasize this, you really have to spend time and be inclusive of the coastal communities that will be affected by your work.
Great, yeah, thanks so much, Ken. And yeah, good reminder that you can't do community engagement from a laptop, and it's really important to meaningfully build those relationships. Alexa or Ashley, I'll turn it over to you if you have any comments on community engagement, and how do we do that in a meaningful way.
I would echo everything that Kenneth just said, and just say, and I would echo again the point of, you should never go in with the mentality of, I'm here to save, or I'm here to do this, or I'm here to do that. It should always be from a place of being humble, and any agenda that you thought you had, you need to loosen that, because you're going to learn so much more if you remain open in those spaces. So even though I travel a lot for work, and that includes global, and every time I go to a place, I am always reminded that I feel like I have gained more than I have given back, even though you try and give a lot back. And I think that's really important, is to realize, that those relationships are very, very important. And that if you really want to build, and I hate using the term sustainable now, because I think it's overused, but if you want to build a long-lasting business, and that's the lens that I use, that those relationships really need to be fostered, and they need to be authentic. So authenticity is really important as well.
Great. Thanks a lot, Ashley. Alexa.
And building on what you've said, Ken and Ashley, showing up for the folks that you serve, regardless of what community that is critical, and bringing that human element and that humility and that kindness. But also just changing how we might approach engagement or measuring success, diversity, inclusion. I think a lot of, at least academics, who are, just dipping their toes into EDIA, or organizations that are rooted in academia, will go the let's do a survey route, let's poll our network. And sometimes that can often distill down some of the nuances that might be needed in these more difficult conversations. And I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a colleague who is an EDIA specialist out of the Université de Québec à Rimouski. And when they were hired on, their first task was to gain an understanding of some of the barriers and challenges to addressing EDIA within their organization. And they wanted to, do a survey. And they were very adamant about, not going that approach. It's much more effective to meet with individuals who are hosted at the organization, who work for the organization, and speak to them, ask questions, listen, and not letting it just be, ticking the boxes or putting that information in a survey. And I think, there's pros and cons to every methodology. But just circling back to Ken's point, changing the assumptions of those preconceived notions when we go into any type of activity or initiative, especially around EDIA and leadership.
Great. Thanks very much, Alexa. And lots of good reminders. And I liked, Ashley, too, your comment on authenticity, and Alexa's comments too on certainly centering the people that you're engaging with, as opposed to being more heavy-handed. So I'm going to go back to Ashley, and we've kind of mentioned this in a few different spots, but we want to spend a couple of minutes drilling a little bit deeper in terms of measurements. So how can we measure advancement in equity, diversity, and inclusion and accessibility? What are some possibilities we can look at and we should be looking at?
So the brilliance of these conversations is that I went into this question with a particular lens, but from the conversation that we've had now, it's kind of changed a little bit. So anytime you say measurement to me, my brain automatically turns on, I turn on my math brain. I'm like, okay, how are we actually measuring this? And so it can be anything. I think employee feedback, so kind of feeding on what Alexa just mentioned, is critical. Performance, attrition, all of those things, those are measurable metrics. But to Ken's point that he made right at the beginning of the panel, when ultimately we're doing better holistically by the planet. And I think that takes a lot of systemic change as well. And I think that's perhaps why this topic can create so many very robust feelings in everybody, is because it's a really deep rooted thing that it needs a lot of change. So if anything, I would plug, there is a wonderful paper that was written on a nature-based economy, written by, I think it's Ralph Fiennes. And it really gets into the systemic change that is needed on how we look at our world economy and placing more value on nature. So perhaps when we've I think diversity and inclusion is a part of that, and accessibility. And that could perhaps be some of the ways in which we measure.
Great. Yeah, thanks very much, Ashley. Alexa, any comments on measurement or performance indicators, things like that?
Yeah, I want to build on what Ashley said there. I think those are some really key ways of measuring advancement. I think many of us are still learning how best to measure progress. But one thing I just recently learned is, not just looking at employee feedback, but from, I see a lot of early career professionals in our audience today asking about turnover rate. Retention rate in interviews will give a clear indicator of, some of the challenges an organization may face. Asking employers, what's your take on EDIA? What are some of your policies and programs in place? Those are all really important questions to be asking and are a good litmus test for, where a group stand, and recognizing that we're all on this this journey, as Ashley mentioned. It's not, it's not just a stepwise thing. And I think another way of measuring advancement is also looking at, leadership. Which type of voices are we celebrating? Who are our role models, and questioning that really thoroughly, and asking, ourselves the questions of why do we look up to those folks, is really important as well. When it comes down to from a programming perspective, I do struggle with, some of these certain very targeted awards and grants that are, for specific communities, for specific groups of individuals. And I'm not sure that there's really necessarily a clear best path forward, but ensuring that there's pieces of the pie for everyone in a way that's equitable, making sure that groups who might not necessarily be afforded the same privilege aren't able to reach, the same privilege that others might be afforded, if that makes sense.
Great, thanks, Alexa. Ken, any comments on measurements? What should we really be? What are the kinds of things we should be tracking in terms of progress?
Well, I have a little bit of difficulty with this question, so I'm not really sure what you want to measure, like the overall success of the blue economy strategy, or the success of individual businesses, or
I think it's more the success of inclusion, right? What can we measure to ensure, what are the things that we need to be looking at to ensure that we are actually building an inclusive blue economy?
Well, I mean, if you talk about inclusion with respect to the people, I mean, like demographic inclusion is one of the more important things. Scans of that and find out, like does the workforce reflect like Canadian society and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely.
The variety of different kinds of education backgrounds that are in there, the different ages that are in there, that kind of thing. It's hard to keep people into positions as well. I realize that. Like, I know that young people coming into positions now, what some professors at University of Carleton who've done all these studies in demographics have said that, like in my parents' age, like my mother or my father would have one or two employers throughout their career.
Sure, yeah.
But for younger people coming into the workforce now, they can have anywhere between 25 to 30 employers over the course of their career. And as a person that has hired people on over the years, going into this, I know that if I bring somebody in, I'm probably going to have them for about 3 years. But that doesn't change how I treat them. They still get the full training. They still get the full opportunities to speak at conferences or work with colleagues and things like that. And some people would say that, well, why are you making an investment in people if you know they're going to leave? Well, for me, it's like, well, even when people leave, if they have a good experience at one organization, then they will talk, they kind of be ambassadors, I guess, of that organization, saying, oh, remember when I worked with that organization there? It was really good. And, they had this good program, they had these great benefits and got to do this interesting work. If you treat them badly, then of course the opposite comes true. So, but to measure like diversity outside of demographics, it's a little bit hard to do for me. And then you got to sort of, you got to take into consideration like people's privacy as well, because people maybe don't want you to tell you their age, for example.
Right.
So you got to be careful about that kind of stuff too. But yeah, that I have a bit of a challenge with the scope of that question, honestly.
Right. No, but I think certainly we want, we're looking for the blue economy to truly reflect the community of Canada. And I think some good comments too around looking at building leaders across the blue economy. So not necessarily when you're hiring people, not necessarily hiring them, understanding that their time with that organization might be short, but you're building kind of the leadership capacity for the future and things like that too. I think those are all good reminders. We're going to move to our last question. And so I'd invite those of you in the audience to kind of prepare any questions you'd like to ask of the panelists. And we like to leave our last question on something a little bit more forward thinking. So we'll turn to Alexa to take the lead on this one. what are some priorities for inclusion? So what should we be focused on as either emerging professionals or leaders in the field? What are the things we should all be keeping top of mind?
Before I answer this important question, I'm going to put some information in the chat touching on how we can measure advancement. There are some popular global frameworks that can help you assess, from an organizational perspective, what EDIA practice your group is following, and also provide some really clear metrics to help measure how you stack up as an organization. So I'll provide some of that information in the chat. A lot of that comes out of the Ocean Allies program, also a great program to check out. So in terms of priorities, I think, again, my top 2-3 priorities are probably going to be different from most others. But while I was reflecting on this, I wrote down a few things. One of the first being respect and humility, using a people-first approach. And sometimes I know that this can be challenging depending on the sector, but also if you come from any type of, different background or upbringing, it can be sometimes challenging to bring your whole self to your work. So for example, I'm queer, I'm neurodivergent, and I'm non-binary. So this can sometimes, I'm not always comfortable bringing, my whole personality to certain situations because I'm not sure if I'm going to be safe or I'm going to be respected in the same way. So as a leader, and I encourage everyone in this conversation, try to be yourself, even as scary as that can be in certain situations. Allow yourself to be vulnerable, because when we bring our whole selves to our work, that really is when we're at our best. So that is very important to me. In terms of other priorities for inclusion, I think accessibility and inclusion go hand in hand. If hiring practices are being discriminate towards folks who don't have those credentials, or who have different practical experience, not discrediting that, or other individuals who may be neurodivergent or who need to see questions in advance ahead of an interview, giving them that grace, and trying our best to ensure that we are not being biased. So that's another one of my top priorities, is ensuring that everyone has an ongoing commitment to furthering their learning. And this will look different for everyone depending where you're at in your learning journey. But I think a great place to start is unconscious bias training, especially for folks who are more senior up in their careers. I think this type of training can offer a lot in terms of getting us to think about how we move through the world in ways that maybe we haven't thought about before. I think mentorship is also a really key priority. And a shameless plug for Eco Canada's Blue Mentorship and Leadership Pathway program. I think that using these types of online platforms can help facilitate connections. And, it doesn't necessarily need to be a rigid, hard and fast, this is how mentorship goes. It's going to look a little bit different for everyone. But giving yourself the chance to connect with someone, learning a little bit more about their experience, and again, bringing that human element. And that goes to say, if there's someone who you really look up to as an early career professional, or even, vice versa, if there's someone you look up to in the industry, I definitely recommend reaching out and, maybe asking to meet for a coffee and doing a little bit of an informational interview. And having an opportunity to build those relationships, because I think having an ally or at least someone on your side to help you along can be really huge. But in terms of the overall industry, one of the biggest things for me is intergenerational equity. There are a lot of early career ocean professionals, and there's a large workforce that, whether they're considered, ECOPs or not, there's a lot of young talent out there, and there's a lot of motivation to do good work and to do stable work. So ensuring that we're providing those opportunities to others, and not just promoting based on, numbers of years working, but, long-term value and the diversity and the benefits that can come with allowing those folks to be promoted.
Great, thanks, Alexa. So a lot of jam-packed with a lot of priorities there, but thanks for sharing those. Ken, what would be some priorities for the sector? So if you think about the folks on the call who might be entering the field, what do you think the priorities for inclusion?
I don't know. I think Alexa kind of
Mhm.
filled my mind there.
Great job.
I'm having a little bit of a hard time sort of sorting this one out. Priorities for inclusion. Well, I mean, for me, I'm a big fan of diversity. Like I think that's really important, and I think it's also really important for employers that are looking to hire a diverse workforce to actually educate themselves about and be prepared for people coming in, because there's many cases that I've seen where people have come into work, with good intentions. Employers brought somebody in who was from a background that's not traditionally in that field, and the person didn't last long because there was just all kinds of different either cultural problems or gender-based problems or things that just wasn't understood by the employer. I think that would be a key message I would send out there for others. Try to learn about your coworkers, what they share, so that once you get to know them a little bit more personally, that's how you build longevity and strength within your team.
Yeah, and questioning maybe some of our assumptions around cultural fit and things like that too. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ken. Ashley, I'll give you the last word on priorities, and then I'm going to open it up to the group for questions.
As I was looking at my list, Alexa just kept ticking off everything that I had on my list. So if anything, I also had paying closer attention to how we advertise for positions for businesses. Again, I was recently part of a discussion where it was looked at gender bias in the way that we advertise for positions, which was really interesting. So even the language that we use can automatically discourage certain groups from wanting to apply. So I think that's really important. I had mentor mentee, so Alexa touched on that. I think everybody could do a little bit more education, and this feeds on the intergenerational of just understanding how different the generations are right now. So if you're looking at, boomers and Gen X and millennials and Gen Zs and Gen Alpha, they are all drastically different and they work very differently. And so even just on that basis of something like age, it's really important to understand those types of things as well. So I'll just reiterate the education point. And then as something near and dear to my heart, I would love to see more females working offshore. When I get to a point where I get on a boat and I'm not shocked by the number of females on board, I think we've hit a good point. So I would love that.
Great, thanks, Ashley. So we do have time for a few questions. And so I'd invite those of you who are on the call, you can either raise your hand or come off mic. We have a smaller group today, or certainly add those questions in the chat. So we would love to hear from you, or if you have other comments or would like to share perhaps different ideas that we haven't talked about today or other programs you might be working on, we're happy to hear that as well. Thanks to Alexa too. So Alexa, I haven't downloaded the documents yet, but I know you shared a couple of things. Maybe you could just, while we wait for the question, just let us know what they are. That'd be great.
Yeah, so the first one shows 5 different approaches to EDIA, and this is more applicable from an organizational or business standpoint, to kind of help provide some terms and perspectives on how you might be addressing EDI within your organization. The second is 5 different tiers of progress, helpful for kind of measuring where you might fall within that. And then the last is a direct excerpt from the GE DBI global standards, which I'm still learning lots about, but they do provide some clear categories for which you can measure progress within EDIA.
Great, thanks so much. Any other questions for our panelists this afternoon?
I have a question for the audience. Maybe this is a little shaking it up, and for our panelists too. I challenge everyone. Can you think of 3 BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQ, or folks living with disabilities? Can you name 3 industry professionals or industry scientists, or not necessarily industry, leaders, thought leaders? You know, starting to think about who are we putting up on those pedestals and trying to flip that narrative. I think that's a great place to start. So if you can't think of them, that's okay. Maybe that's a signal to do a little bit more digging.
Okay, I did get one question that just came to me, but it's asking, thanks, Alexa. No, thanks for challenging us on that. Just asking for advice for people who are new to the industry. What kinds of things can an entry, I think I'm just kind of paraphrasing the questions, what can an entry-level professional do to make sure that they're contributing to an inclusive blue economy? So maybe somebody who doesn't necessarily have formal leadership experience or is not in kind of a formal managerial role yet.
I think involvement is key. So just, make sure that you're advocate for yourself to sit at the table and get involved if there are different committees at the place that you work, if there are different elements of, interests that you have. I mean, we all have our job, but we are so much more complex than that. Humans are very complex. And so I think it's important to bring that in. That fosters innovation and creativity in a workspace. So ultimately, it's just about, of actively contributing, and just don't be afraid to put yourself out there a little bit. And I know it can seem really scary when you're just kind of entering into a career and entering into a workspace. I was very scared as an entrepreneur, just kind of putting myself out there. But it's important because what you all have to contribute and what you all have to say is ultimately going to be where this carries us into the future of this economy.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Ashley. Ken or Alexis, so words of wisdom for an early career professional.
I guess what I would say is that like somebody actually asked me this a couple of days ago. I ran into an old friend of mine, and they have a son that is graduating high school and wants to go into marine biology as an undergrad. And he asked me if I thought that was a good idea. And I said, well, definitely yes. I mean, the thing is, this whole thing with the blue economy, whether or not there's a concise strategy that comes out of Canada or not, this is going to be a field that is going to dominate a lot of our economic sectors and environmental sectors for decades to come. Even if we look at the problem of climate change, like the ocean is the largest place for the storage of carbon. So there is different ways. There's leading thought people from around the world that are trying to figure out ways to de-acidify the ocean so that it helps to mitigate some of the climate change problems. With sea level rise, we're going to have to find out better ways to engineer our cities and our ports and to be prepared for more frequent hurricanes and things like that that are going to be coming off our seas. There's big investments now, and there's going to be opening up portions of Atlantic Canada for offshore windmills, which is going to help mitigate some of our energy sector and diversify our energy needs, so we can start, really effectively weaning ourselves off of carbon-based fuels. Green hydrogen, that's another thing that's going to be generated off these marine wind installations, which is also supposed to be a fuel alternative. So like the field is wide open. And in all of this, the thing that really concerns me the most is that there seems to be thinking about fisheries as a secondary effect. Like we talk about sustainable fisheries, but we're not really talking about building fisheries back to abundance. So everything we do, I'm hoping that everybody on this call is going to look at the impact of their industries and try to figure out ways that we can move forward in the ocean sector, but also to really respect our relatives in the ocean. Because if there are no fish in our rivers, we will cease to exist as a species on this planet. That's, that sounds like a dramatic statement, but it's a fact. So we should be looking at minimizing our impact while moving forward. That's where the innovation and the diversity is very much needed, because if we stay with the same business model that we have for building up cities and exploiting land resources, we are really going to do a really disservice to the ocean and to us, because the earth will continue, whether or not we're part of this. I don't know. If any of you've seen Waterworld by Kevin Costner, that's this dystopian future, but there might be something to that if we keep warming up the planet. So this is where my mind goes when we talk about this kind of stuff.
Thanks a lot, Ken. Yeah, thanks for sharing that and for certainly articulating the urgency around it and the importance of not thinking of fisheries necessarily as secondary. That's a critical component. Ashley, I think you put your hand up.
Yeah, just one more piece of advice to early career professionals. I think it's important to remember that if you choose to go the academic route, that, unless it's something like a doctor or an engineer where you come out those things. I did marine biology. You don't come out a marine biologist. You go in to learn how to learn a particular topic, and you need to be very aware that you will need a lot more training when you come out. So micro credentials are incredibly important. Continued professional development and having a plan for that is crucial. And I would advocate that, after you complete something like a degree or a diploma, and I know how much work goes into that, that you still continue in that mindset of what do I want to continue to learn? And if somebody comes to me with a continued professional development plan, A++.
Amazing. Okay, well, we're gonna end on that note, I think, Ashley. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for coming. First of all, for our audience, to Maureen for helping to make this happen, and of course to our panelists, Alexa, Ken, and Ashley, for their time this afternoon. We're getting some nice comments as well in the chat, so much appreciated. And we would love, I'm just going to share, bear with me, I'm going to share one more thing here, which is we have, for those of you who are able to take even just 1 minute to fill out our feedback form, just bear with me. I'm going to just share this link in the chat. We would love if you could just take a minute to fill out our feedback form so that we can just understand how today went and plan future topics if that's okay with you. So thanks very much to everybody. And thank you to our panelists and to Maureen for this afternoon, and all the best. Take care, everyone.